Hello, I'm Reverend Kenny Callahan, the pastor of Metropolitan Community Church of Richmond. The sacred text for this Sunday, the second Sunday of Advent, is taken from Mark's story, the first chapter, verses 1 to 8. I believe that Advent is full of promises. Most scholars consider the brief descriptive opening to Mark's story, "Here begins the gospel of Jesus Christ," not to be actually the first line of the story, but rather its title. Mark literally begins his story with a promise of Isaiah. It's the promise Isaiah makes to desperate Israel at one of the low points of its history. And while Mark clearly invites us to see John the Baptist as a fulfillment of Isaiah's promise that one will come crying out in the wilderness, it's Isaiah's promise of comfort, deliverance, and renewal that Mark is claiming that happens in the life and ministry of Jesus. Promises create an expectation about the future, and that future expectation sets something in motion right here and right now in the present. The same is true about God's promises. Truth be told, even more so. And that is the key to the message of Advent, that in the stable at Bethlehem, God is not only keeping God's promises made to Israel, but also making promises to us. That in Jesus, God hears our fears, our concerns, our doubts, our joys, and God responds. I know, you're probably thinking, well, that's a kind of promise we've heard before, and at times may feel like just more pie in the sky approach to life and living. But consider this. What if God's promises are not all about something we may patiently wait for until the end of time? What if we are invited to participate here and now in the promises of God by contributing to them in the present? What if part of how God keeps God's promises is through our efforts to heal, to comfort, to help, and bring justice by actively, fully engaging in our lives? I believe Mark has something to say about that as well. Notice that Mark doesn't call his story the gospel or good news of the gospel of Jesus. Rather, he entitles it, "Here begins the gospel of Jesus Christ," which means that everything Mark has to say about Jesus, all the healing, all the preaching, all the teaching, and even Jesus' death and resurrection is only the beginning of the good news. There's still more to come. Maybe that's why Mark's story ends in such a strange, unsettling way. The angel announces Jesus' resurrection and commands the women at the tomb to go and share the good news, but they run away terrified and say nothing to anyone. Mark finishes his story with an open ending because it is just the beginning. The story isn't over, which means we are all invited to continue the story of the good news of Jesus as God continues to write the gospel of Jesus in and through our lives as individuals and as a community.